don't want to spoil it, but that is how Clarence, as I mentioned earlier, would come to open the hatch of that German tank, look inside, and for the first time face one of the men he killed. That is how he turned the tide in one of the last great battles the Spearhead Division would ever fight. That is how he knocked out his 5th tank of World War II, and it just so happened to be the most dramatic and the capstone to an absolutely amazing career. And again, a story I was just so honored to tell.
When he came face to face with this other German tank gunner, and it's not just somebody that he's keeping his distance from, like in previous battles, but he's actually seeing that there's a human operating the machine on the other side for the first time. Did he say anything about how did that affect him differently from previous battles?
The amazing transformation he went through from being this guy who was so timid, he didn't want to kill anybody, didn't want to pull the trigger, to looking at that young German and feeling great remorse, but at the same time saying, why were they still fighting? Why couldn't they just give up? Why were they killing our people up to the last day? What was it for? The war was lost. The Ruhr was going to be encircled anyway about it. It was over. Why were these instructors coming out from the German armor school with these young trainees in their tanks and fighting to the last man? Why was the SS fighting for Nazism to the last day? And that's what he looked at that man, and he felt remorse. But you know what? Clarence didn't beat himself up anymore over that. He said, they earned this. They're reaping what they sowed. And so he kind of went from being this passive guy to this cigarette-smoking, badass American tank gunner. And he went through this transformation that, kind of like, I don't want to say a real-life fury, but by the end, he's a guy you could make a movie about. And I really think they're going to, one of these days, they're going to turn the book into a movie, and we're going to get to see this Sergeant York, this Audie Murphy, who became a true American legend.
Where does life take him after the war comes to an end and he returns to the U.S.?
Well, for Clarence, he thought he was going to go home and get some rest. And then he gets home and one of his friends says, hey, you better grab a job because all the GIs returning from battle are taking all the jobs. So he rests for about 2 days, gets a job working in a cinder block factory. He had a very humble upbringing. He was very poor growing up. And so he went and got any job he could. He married his childhood sweetheart, and he put the war behind him for most of his life. He was never one of those veterans to put a license plate on his car or to really even go to reunions. The war came back, though, for Clarence, and what made the postscript to Spearhead such a powerful thing. At first I thought, does anybody really want to read about this World War II veteran when he turns 80 years old, when he turns 90? Does anybody care what happened to him all those years later? But what went through Clarence's life, what he experienced was absolutely remarkable. One day he watched the film, a friend sent him a VHS, and he watched the film of himself fighting in battle. And it brought back a lot of traumatic memories of all the stuff he had tried to block out. And it wasn't just memories of, I had done this or I had done that. It was memories of the buddies he had lost. It was almost like this film represented the whole experience, the cumulative pain of that war. And suddenly he started seeing the faces of men he lost, the enemies he killed. Everything just came roaring back. He wanted to talk about what had happened. He went to the VA, but he couldn't bring himself to go into one of those rooms for the veterans suffering from PTSD. At that time, they were younger men, and he said, oh, my God, I'm a World War II veteran. I can't sit down with some veteran of Iraq or Afghanistan or Vietnam. I mean, they're going to laugh at me. He couldn't do it. He said, but who am I going to talk to? How can I vent? How can I unload this? And he realized his whole crew was dead. He was one of 3 men left from his entire tank company. And then he realized, wait a second, there is somebody I can talk to, somebody who saw the exact same things I saw in the city of Cologne. The man who saw the same things he did was his enemy, Gustav Schaefer. And so Clarence, through German journalists and historian, began searching Germany for the man he fought against. And he knew where they had fought. He knew the intersection where they had squared off. He was looking for Gustav Schaefer. Gustav was the last person who could actually commiserate with him and maybe help him heal. And I'll say this much. He found Gustav, and he reached out to him. And he said, would you like to meet? And in 2013, they made plans to Clarence travel to Germany, and he let me come along with him. They gathered at the Cologne Cathedral, because I had met Clarence by then. I said, can I witness this? Can I take notes? Can I take photos? Can I watch history happen? And he said, yes, you may. And so I got to watch as these two old enemies faced off at the Cologne Cathedral almost 75 years after they had fought in battle. And Gustav was this little short German at the time. He was 18 years old when he fought in World War II. Now he was in his early 90s. And he was this little short guy with a black jacket and dark sunglasses. And Clarence is this big, tall American wearing a gray U.S. Army windbreaker and a Spearhead ball cap. And to see these men come together and shake hands and hug, and to watch them go drink beer at the hotel and swap stories and tell jokes. One of the jokes I was privy to witness was Clarence said, well, Gustav, did you have a bathroom in your tank? Because we had one in ours. It was a complete lie. It was a nonsense. He was joking. And Gustav said, oh, yeah, Clarence, we had a bathroom in the empty shell casings. And then Clarence said, oh, yeah, but did you have a refrigerator in your tank? We had a refrigerator. And Gustav, not missing a beat, said, oh, yes, of course we had a refrigerator, but only in winter time. Because they had no heater, it would get so cold inside, you could literally, icicles would form on the roof of the Panther. So Gustav and Clarence, I'm watching these two guys hit it off. They're cracking jokes. Gustav tells Clarence, hey, what kind of car do you have? Clarence says, wait, why do you care? What does it matter? And Gustav says, I look at your house on Google Earth, and I wonder what it's like on the inside. You see, Gustav's hobby was sitting at his little computer and exploring the world on Google Earth. And so he had already stalked Clarence before they met. After that, they would exchange Christmas cards. They would exchange letters. They even talked on Skype, face to face, a German and an American, 70-some years later, facing each other over the computer as friends. And to the last days of their lives, they called each other best friends because they were some of the last men standing. They're some of the last World War II tank soldiers. And it turned out they just had a lot in common, and they regretted the fact they ever had to fight each other. And I'll just say this, when they had parted in Cologne, one of the things Gustav said to Clarence was, Clarence said, I'll see you again someday. And Gustav said, yes, I'll see you in heaven. And in the next life, we will be comrades. And as a journalist, I'm standing there, I'm just saying, my God, this is, you don't make stuff up like this. Reality is better than fiction.
Yeah, thanks for sharing this story, Adam. And to close things out, I have a two-parter question. First, what do you think are the main messages and, I suppose, moral of the story that you got from looking at Clarence's story? And second, in that epilogue that you mentioned where they became friends, that's something I've seen in different places. There's the story of in 1914 of the two sides in World War I putting down arms on Christmas Day to play soccer and speak with each other. And there's a great movie from a few years ago called Noel that dramatizes this event. And then I think there's also a quote by the Cambridge professor of literature, C.S. Lewis, where when he himself, a veteran of World War I, said, I can imagine that if the two sides who had shot and killed each other get to heaven, they could be able to laugh about this event. What do you think it is? Is it that the two sides, even though they're fighting for two sides, they're in the same physical space and they get each other in a way that no one else would? And one other example that came to my mind was the 1995 movie Heat with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, where there's I think he's an FBI agent or a police officer in the movie. I forget Al Pacino's character. And Robert De Niro is the bank robber, but the two understand each other in a way that even their own families don't because they've been in the heat of battle. So what do you think is going on there?
Well, you bring up a great example. The Christmas truce is famous for this. The movie War Horse even showed this scene where the German and the British soldier meet and they shake hands in no man's land and free the horse. there's just something about warfare. I think World War II stories and war stories have been told very poorly for the past 75 years, in that we have celebrated, the kind of the World War II, you might say, take on warfare. And that is John Wayne flying leathernecks, shooting down Japanese, and let's storm the beaches in the longest day and fight at Arnhem. And it's usually, our side versus theirs. And sometimes, though, we show the other side. Sometimes we show they're human. Sometimes they're caricatures, though. And the reality was the men who were stuck fighting and dying in World War II really didn't want to be in World War II. Clarence wanted to be roller skating at home with his friends, having a girlfriend, getting his first job. Gustav wanted to be a train conductor. That was his dream. He used to go and pedal his bicycle several miles on a Sunday, and he'd sit there and he'd watch the trains go by between Hamburg and Bremen. And his dream was just to be a train conductor. He didn't want to be in a tank fighting for the Nazis in World War II. Clarence didn't even want to be in a tank fighting for the Americans in World War II. The people that sent them there, these rich and powerful, these despots, these leaders, it's easy for them to send young people to fight and die. And that's the ultimate tragedy, that these men who are forced to square off oftentimes don't want to be there. And then once they share that experience, they sometimes say they have more in common with their enemy than the civilians back home, than their friends and neighbors who cheer them on as they go to war. And that is the ultimate tragedy of it all. And that's why I'm so proud that Spearhead is a book unlike any other, because you get to see World War II from both sides. We take you inside Clarence's tank as he's fighting his way toward the city for Cologne, but we also take you inside Gustav's tank, and you're watching his tank hold off the American army and battle toward the city of Cologne, where he's sent on this suicide mission. And the suicide mission is he's sent into the city with 2 other German tanks, and they said, you're going to stop the Americans. And what Americans are they going to stop? Gustav was sent to stop Clarence Smoyer. And so 1 in a million that these men would be alive, 1 in a million that they'd become friends, 1 in a million that 2 men who were sent to fight each other would tell their story and to discover that they actually should have been best friends all along. And so it's a beautiful story, and I think it's the ultimate war story, and it's how we should tell war stories, because just the idea of we beat them, well, we're only telling half of it, because the side that loses, the side that suffers, there's no winner, there's no loser. And that's what Spearhead taught me. That's what my earlier book, A Higher Call, taught me. And that was a story of a German who spared an American bomber. And later on, those guys became best friends. So for me, lightning has struck twice. Stories of enemy turned friends. And I think it's really the way, if we're going to look at war going forward, this is the way to do it.
Well, thank you for that. And as a final closing thought, I'm starting to get a little bit reticent about having so many episodes on World War II, because I think it can distort people's understanding of warfare, where it's good versus evil, as if it's Gondor versus the orcs. And across history, warfare is much, much more complicated and not something to be thought about lightly, and not just think about guns blazing, gung-ho, whatever, roughneck cowboys going in. So thanks for sharing all this, Adam. And if people want to learn more about you, your other books as well, everything you're up to, where's the best place to find you online?
Well, again, I appreciate having the chance to tell this story, Scott. I'm on Facebook, Adam Makos. I'm pretty active on Instagram, as everybody is these days. So Adam Makos on Instagram. I also have a website where you can watch the film of Clarence destroying the Panther tank in Cologne, adammakos.com. And I urge people to give Spearhead a try. It's available at bookstores everywhere. It's New York Times bestseller, Los Angeles Times, USA Today, Wall Street Journal bestseller. I mean, it's become one of the highest rated World War II books. I think on Amazon it's got a 91% 5-star rating. So, you're not taking a huge chance if you give it a read. It's been proven, and it's going strong. It came out just in the year 2019, and it's still picking up steam. So I'd urge people to pick up Spearhead today and discover the story of Clarence and Gustav and our tank guys who fought in World War II. It's unlike any other you've ever read.
Great. And I'll link to all that in the show notes so people can check it out. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Scott. This was a lot of fun.
All right, listeners. Well, that is all that I have for today's episode. I'd like to kick things off by thanking the Spy Masters for this episode, and I'll explain what that is in a second. Vic Austin,